This is Toys R Us on the 1st of January, 1998. 1,454 stores, 1,013 of them American. $11 billion of toys sold that fiscal year. Jeffrey over the door, bikes stacked to the ceiling, the Lego aisle, the till you queued at on a Saturday. And on the balance sheet dated 31 January 1998, long-term debt of $851 million. $851 million of borrowing, carried by a company selling $11 billion a year. 20 years and 5 months later, the last American store closes, and 33,000 people are sent home without severance. The number that closed it had not been borrowed yet. Stand in one while it still works. 441 of your stores are outside America, and in fiscal 1197, they send back $2.9 billion of the $11 billion. Every toy company on Earth is trying to get onto your shelves, and when you put a thing on an end cap in October, that thing has a Christmas. 2 figures from these years, side by side, and nobody remarks on either. In 1998, Walmart takes 17.4% of the American toy market. You take 16.8%. And in 1998, your own debt line reads $851 million against shareholders' equity of $4,428 million. Hold the second one. On the 18th of September 2017, Toys R Us files voluntary petitions under Chapter 11 in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Eastern District of Virginia, carrying about $5 billion of debt obligations, roughly 64,000 employees, and close to 1,600 stores still trading on the day the papers go in. 6 months later, on the 15th of March 2018, the American business stops trying. 735 United States stores go to liquidation, and 33,000 American employees are dismissed without severance. The last stores close on the 29th of June 2018. 64,000 people worked here. Nobody who worked here was paid to leave. Keep that open. The name everybody reaches for is Amazon, and the case is good. It starts in 2000. Toys R Us. Com signs an agreement running through 2010 to be the exclusive toy shop inside Amazon's website, and pays Amazon a base fee of $50 million annually, plus a percentage of its own sales on top. Read what that means for a second. For the 10 years that agreement was meant to run, the online Toys R Us is a page on somebody else's site, rented at $50 million a year. Somebody else owns the checkout. Somebody else owns the customer. That is the case against Amazon. It is the one almost every account of this company settles on. And if you asked 100 people in a car park why Toys R Us closed, 90 of them would give you a version of it. Now put it against the ledger. The court record first, and then the one figure nobody ever quotes. What the American toy business was actually doing the whole time this was happening. Here is the part that surprises almost everyone. That agreement did not end with Amazon beating Toys R Us in the market. It ended with a judge finding against Amazon. In 2006, in the New Jersey Chancery Court, Judge Margaret Mary McVeigh handed down a judgment 133 pages long, holding that Amazon had breached the agreement and had damaged the unique position of Toys R Us and its ability to plan or craft strategies. She awarded nothing. The court was not satisfied that Toys R Us had proved it paid a premium for the exclusivity it thought it had bought. 3 years later, in 2009, Amazon paid Toys R Us $51 million to settle the case. Look at the shape of that, because it is the reverse of the story everybody tells. The toy company sued the bookshop. The bookshop paid. Now look at what Amazon is supposed to have taken. Fiscal 2016 is the last full year this company ever finishes. It ends on the 28th of January 2017, 8 months before the bankruptcy papers go in. In fiscal 2016, Toys R Us sells $11,540 million of merchandise, down $262 million on the year before. Stay with the first figure, not the second. $11.5 billion of toys, prams, bikes, and board games. Moving across tills in the year, everybody agrees the company was already dead. Trucks still running to close to 1,600 buildings. Somebody still driving to a Toys R Us on a Saturday in 2016 and coming out with a bag. And the online business is not shrinking either. E-commerce sales grow 11% across fiscal 2016, and the domestic toy categories, once you take the entertainment aisle out of the count, grow 2.5% on a comparable basis. Read that the way you would read your own numbers. A retailer being killed by an online competitor does not post growing online sales in its final full year. None of which makes Amazon innocent. Those 10 years of renting a page cost Toys R Us the decade in which every other retailer in America was learning how to pick, pack, and ship a parcel, and by 2017 Amazon was selling toys at prices that assumed toys were not where the money came from. But a fall of $262 million on $11,540 million of sales in a year is not what destruction looks like. It is a company standing still. Standing still is only fatal when something else is moving. If you want the number that actually did this, subscribe now because it arrives in about 4 minutes and it is not a sales figure. So the customers were there. The sales were there. What was moving? The second suspect is the one the company named itself under oath. On the 19th of September 2017, the day after the petitions go in, Chairman and Chief Executive David Brandon files a declaration with the bankruptcy court. In it, he tells the judge that Target, Walmart, and Amazon price toys at low margins or as loss leaders, at prices Toys R Us cannot compete with, because unlike them, it relies exclusively on toys for profit. That is real, and it is worth being exact about the mechanism, because it is the whole reason a category killer stops killing. A discounter does not need the toy aisle to make money. It needs the toy aisle to get a parent through the automatic doors in November, and it will sell a bike at cost to do it, because the same trolley is going to collect a television, a turkey, and 4 weeks of groceries on the way to the till. You cannot answer that. There is no turkey in your shop. Every dollar that crosses your counter has to come out of a toy. And it compounds, because every square foot you own is committed to one category. When a grocery chain decides to use your category as bait for 6 weeks a year, you cannot retreat into a different aisle and wait it out. You do not have a different aisle. You have this aisle in 1,013 American buildings all year, whether anybody is buying bikes in March or not. And the share figures back him. In 1,990, Toys R Us holds 25% of the American toy market. By 1,997, it is 18%. By 1,999, it is down to 15.6%. Those two figures left sitting at the start belong here. In 1,998, Walmart takes 17.4% of that market, and Toys R Us takes 16.8%, and the biggest toy seller in America stops being the biggest toy seller in America. Here is where the case against the discounters breaks. That pressure begins in 1990, and it never lets up. 17 years into it, in fiscal 2012, Toys R Us records net sales of $13,543 million, which is more than it sold in fiscal 1997 at the top of the empire, with Walmart already past it and gaining. You do not put up a number like that while you are being priced out of existence. You put it up while somebody else is taking the money. And in fiscal 2012, that same company earns $39 million. Say those two out loud together. $13.5 billion sold, $39 million kept. Price competition does not produce that gap. Price competition eats the sales line, and the sales line here is enormous. This is a business doing $13.5 billion of trade and being allowed to keep almost none of it, and the discounters are not the ones taking it. Something else in that same year took the rest, and it was not standing in a grocery aisle. The third suspect gets set in living rooms more than the other two. Children do not play with toys anymore. They have screens, and there are fewer children. The second half of that is measurable, and it is true. American births reach an all-time high of 4,316,233 in 2007, and then fall in every single year that follows. That lands harder here than it would on a supermarket because this company sells cribs. Of the 1,013 United States stores trading at the start of 1,998, 98 of them are infant-toddler stores. Prams, cots, car seats, bottle warmers, the changing table your sister registered for. A whole second business, built on the quiet assumption that Americans would go on having babies at the 2007 rate. They did not. And a crib is not a repeat purchase. It is bought once, inside a window about 18 months wide, and if you miss the birth, you never get the sale. There is no catch-up quarter for a pram, and the entertainment aisle is soft in fiscal 2016. That is the company's own word for it in its own results, and it is the aisle where video games used to sit, before consoles started selling their games down a wire instead of in a box. So, fewer babies and a dying aisle. Now the figure that closes this one. American toy sales rise 7% in 2015 and another 6% in 2016, which is the biggest increase since 1999. That is not Toys R Us. That is the whole American toy market, rising measured across the 2 years in which this company walked into a bankruptcy court. 2 consecutive years of growth in the exact trade it existed to serve, arriving at the exact moment it could not do anything with them. The children had not gone anywhere. Neither had the money. It was being handed over in shops all year, and $11,540 million of it was handed over inside these stores in fiscal 2016. 3 suspects questioned, 3 alibis on the specific charge. Amazon did not take the revenue, the discounters did not take the revenue, and the customers never stopped bringing it. So follow it. The money is still coming through the doors. Find out what happens to it before it reaches a shelf. The 17th of March 2005. The board of Toys R Us agrees to sell the company to Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, Bain Capital Partners, and Vornado Realty Trust at $26.75 per share in cash. That sale completes on the 1st of July that same year. Price in 2005, $6.6 billion, of which more than $5.3 billion is borrowed. Stop on that second figure, because everything after it follows from it. The money was not borrowed by the buyers. It was borrowed by Toys R Us. That is what a leverage buyout is, and the phrase does a good job of hiding it. So here it is in shop terms. You do not buy the shop with your money. You walk the shop into a bank, have the shop sign for the loan, take the cash the shop just borrowed, and hand it to the people selling you the shop. Then you own the shop, and the shop owes $5.3 billion to people it has never met, for the privilege of having been bought. Nothing about the shop changes on the day that happens. The same 1,013 American buildings open the next morning. The same staff clock in. The same lorries back up to the same loading bays. The only thing that is different is a line on a piece of paper, and that line now has first claim on every dollar that crosses every till, ahead of the roof, ahead of the wages, ahead of the website. So how much did the buyers actually put in? Vornado Realty Trust provides about $450 million of equity in 2005 for a 1/3 interest in the buying group. 3 equal thirds, roughly $1.3 billion of buyer money, against a $6.6 billion price in 2005. And that borrowing is the figure that replaced the $851 million sitting on the 1,998 balance sheet. $851 million to more than $5.3 billion in a single afternoon in a boardroom, with the stores unchanged, the staff unchanged, and the customers unchanged. Now the arithmetic that ends the case. Fiscal 2016. The year ends on the 28th of January 2017. In fiscal 2016, Toys R Us earns $460 million in operating profit. That is what the stores generate. Every till, every Christmas Eve, every Saturday morning, across close to 1,600 buildings, after the toys have been bought in, the staff have been paid, and the lights have been kept on. In that same year, fiscal 2016, the company pays $457 million in interest, $460 million in, $457 million straight back out. That is 99.35% of everything the stores made in a year, gone before $1 of it could reach a shop floor, a delivery van, a website, or a wage. The company keeps $3 million. $3 million out of $11,540 million of sales in fiscal 2016. That is the whole margin for error for a business running close to 1,600 buildings. Its net loss for fiscal 2016 is $36 million. By fiscal 2016, this is not a toy company carrying debt. It is a debt structure with close to 1,600 toy stores attached to it, and the stores are there to service the loan that was taken out to buy the stores. Money that leaves as interest cannot be spent on anything else. That is arithmetic, not opinion, and the record shows precisely what it did not get spent on. In fiscal 2016, Toys R Us spends $252 million on capital expenditure across close to 1,600 stores, divided out. That is roughly $157,000 per store for the whole of fiscal 2016. $157,000 per building per year to cover the roof, the car park, the lighting, the shelving, the tills, the toilets, the loading bay, and anything you might want to change about the way the place looks when a parent walks in. Anyone who has ever fitted out a single retail unit knows what that number buys. It buys maintenance. It does not pay for a refit. And in fiscal 2016, the interest bill is $457 million. Capital spending, $252. Interest, $457. The loan is getting close to twice what the buildings are getting. And the chairman said so himself in writing to a federal judge. In his declaration of the 19th of September 2017, David Brandon tells the court that debt service payments had been consuming approximately $400 million in cash annually. And then he names what that had cost: the general upkeep and the condition of the stores, the inability to provide expedited shipping options, and the lack of a subscription-based delivery service. Now read that back as a list of symptoms rather than a list of excuses. Tired stores, slow delivery, no subscription. Those are, almost word for word, the three complaints every customer had about Toys R Us in its last decade. And the chief executive is telling a judge, under oath, that the company could not fix any of them because the money was spoken for before it arrived. Here is the part that makes the chain visible. This company was never short of sales. In fiscal 2012, it sold $13,543 million of merchandise, more than it sold in fiscal 1997, paid $480 million in interest, and kept $39 million. And its long-term debt in fiscal 2012 stands at $4,990 million, 7 years after the buyout. 7 years. Hundreds of millions of dollars paid out, every single one of them, on time. And the amount owed has barely moved. That is how the structure is built, not how the shop was run. The interest is rent on the money, and paying rent has never reduced what you owe. There was one way out, and they tried it. In May 2010, the owners register an $800 million public offering, the proceeds of which would have gone against the debt. It sits on the shelf for almost 3 years while the numbers get worse. They withdraw the registration on the 29th of March 2013. After that, there is no exit left except the one that arrives in 2017. One decision could have changed all of this, and it has a date on it, and it is not a dramatic date. The 7th of March 2005. A boardroom. The board of Toys R Us accepts $26.75 per share in cash, and the sale completes that July. Here is what each party at that table ended up with. The buyers put in about $450 million each, roughly $1.3 billion of their own money in 2005, and eventually wrote all of it down to zero. That is a real loss, and it should be said plainly. They lost the equity. Nobody at that table walked away with a fortune made out of the collapse, and the easy version of this story, in which somebody got rich off the corpse, is not the one the filings show. Along the way, though, the company recorded $183 million in advisory fees payable to those same three owners, about $61 million each, between 2005 and 2017. Money in, $1.3 billion. Money back out as fees, invoiced to the shop by the people who owned the shop, $183 million. The 33,000 American workers dismissed in 2018 received no severance. Those are the terms. Not the ones in the press release of the 7th of March 2005, but the ones you get by reading that agreement backwards, starting from the end. And the last thing worth saying about that boardroom is that nobody in it was trying to close Toys R Us. That is the part people get wrong when they go looking for a villain in this story. The structure required no malice at all. It required a company with steady takings, a name good enough to lend against, and a balance sheet clean enough to carry the loan. Once the borrowing was done, the arithmetic ran by itself for 12 years, and nobody had to decide anything ever again. An interest payment does not call a meeting. It does not need a strategy, a consultant, or a turnaround plan. It arrives every quarter, in full, ahead of everything else, and by the time anybody looks up, the stores are tired and the delivery is slow, and there is no line left in the accounts to pay for either. In November 2018, Bain Capital and Kohlberg Kravis Roberts fund $20 million to be shared among former Toys R Us employees. Individual payments in 2018 run from $200 to a little over $12,000, depending on salary, position, and years served. That was not the company's money. The company had none left, and it arrived 5 months after the last store closed on the 29th of June 2018. 64,000 people worked there. That is who ended up paying them, and that is what it came to. set that $20 million against the $183 million in advisory fees those same three owners recorded between 2005 and 2017. The same three names on both lines, 11 years apart. Now go back to the 1st of January, 1998. 1,454 stores trading. Jeffrey still over the door. In 1998, long-term debt of $851 million against shareholders' equity of $4,428 million. Nothing that happened to the toy trade between those two dates explains the distance between them. The children kept buying. The stores kept selling. In fiscal 2016, those stores earned $460 million. In that same year, fiscal 2016, interest took $457 million of it. What closed in 2018 is not a toy shop that fell behind. It was a working retailer that was sold to itself with borrowed money and then charged for that loan every year until there was nothing left to charge. So the next time somebody tells you a website killed Toys R Us, ask them one question. What was the shop earning in its last full year? $460 million. It was never the shop that failed.